And so the key, what you're saying, is to become a leader who essentially understands that your first and foremost priority is that of making the most, the most reasonable and the most effective decisions that are going to be the best for everyone based on virtue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. We see a lot of behaviors that have actually been encouraged for many decades in organizations. You know, the corporate structures are set up in a way that the way that people can influence, if you like, or be perceived to be influencing within the organizations is a key indicator as to their progression up the corporate ladder. And so that's been a big focus for us for many, many years and decades in our organizations. What I think we're seeing now is a shift happening where hierarchies and bureaucracies are falling out of favor, if you like. And people are less accepting of a lot of the behaviors that were once revered. And so we're seeing quite a shift in how we're operating in our societies from a business perspective. And it's becoming a lot more collegial. It's becoming a lot more cognizant of the different skills and contributions that everyone in the organization brings to the conversation. And, you know, we're seeing leaders who are actually making decisions now that are a little bit more self-aware. So we've seen some leaders in recent times, and I have to say I'm not particularly in favor of the term leader. I actually prefer the enactment of leadership because the leader-follower dynamic is, you know, I think it's a little bit past its due date.
Well, everyone can show leadership, right? But
exactly.
But if you focus on leader and follower, then you feel as though you're never there because you're not in the top position.
Yeah. So it's I think better to talk about it in the sense of enacting leadership, regardless of your position in the hierarchy. So we're seeing leaders again. We're seeing leadership enacted in different ways now, where people in positions of authority within hierarchies are accepting fates similar to what they're expecting of their employees. And so certainly we're seeing in Australia and around the world at the moment where businesses are struggling like we've never seen before, and hopefully we'll never see again. But instead of having people within those authoritarian positions just handing down the bad news to the employees, a lot of them are taking personal hits, if you like, to their own circumstances as well. Whether or not it's going far enough remains to be seen, and it's up to anyone's personal assessment of that. But we're definitely seeing a shift, and a lot of organizations setting themselves up under different models than a hierarchy, for instance, with the recognition that we want people to bring their absolute best into the workplace, and we need to acknowledge that people need to be seen in that way and interacted with in that way.
Yeah, this is an interesting discussion because it's very clear that companies are changing, right? That and they're trying to adapt to a new way of doing things. Like, we're no longer in the industrial age, right? We're in the information age. People don't want to just specialize in one specific field for the rest of their life and, you know, have one job for the rest of their life. They want to be constantly challenged. They want you know, different avenues to go down, and I'd like to know how you see companies progressing in the future based on what you see at the moment. And do you think that I'll phrase it like this. I've seen that it's helpful for people to, when they're going into a new position, to not just put in front of them their skills that they have that are specific to that situation or to that job, but to also present the skills, the activities that they do outside of work, the other skills that they have that don't necessarily relate specifically to that career path, because that means that they can draw connections from various disciplines, right? Yeah. Do you think that there will be a shift towards not necessarily encouraging people to do one thing for the rest of their life, but to draw connections between various disciplines, philosophies, personal development, hobbies, and their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're already seeing it, perhaps on a smaller scale than hopefully we will as it moves through our society. But one of the things that I love to do is I'm a writer at heart. So I write articles for a number of member organizations. And I recently wrote an article on introducing flexibility in the workplace. And which, obviously, again, these days, what we're going through at the moment, companies are forced into this if they haven't already been applying it. But I had a really interesting conversation with a businesswoman in Canada who runs a clinic of naturopaths and acupuncturists and dietitians, and so a really interesting business model where it's not actually set up as a traditional company, if you like, but it's a lot of people contributing their expertise and their knowledge to one organization. And so there's a number of different models for engaging those people, from contracts to some of them were actually employees, but others were subcontracted and various arrangements. But the interesting thing that she talked about was that she doesn't focus necessarily on the skills and the techniques of the person when she's seeing whether or not they're a good fit for the company and the business that she's building. What she focuses on is their values and what perspectives and what approaches they would actually bring to the organization, and whether or not that aligns with what she's trying to create. So I think when we get down to what somebody is all about, we get a much better picture of whether or not they're the right person for the organization, or whether the organization is the right organization for them. And so whilst we can focus on technical skills, obviously we need people to know what they're doing. We can also expand that so that we're actually looking at whether or not the people are actually the right fit for each other or for the organization. And so we start to develop a much more culturally aware approach to building organizations. And the leadership then emerges through the organization, because we're not as focused on positions, if you like, or hierarchies or bureaucratic systems, to engage people with what we're trying to create.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Kind of like a collective kind of model, right? Like using the best skills of everybody to combine. So who leads the organization then? How does it work? I'm really interested in this kind of model.
Yeah. Well, I love this kind of model, and this is how I love to work with other organizations as well, is that everyone brings their perspectives, their knowledge, their expertise to the table, basically. But we're not employees or employers of each other. And so ultimately, in the example that I gave, she is the director of that company. But the way that the company is run, the way that the business is run, is, if you like, the hierarchy is almost flat. And so everyone has a contribution to make. She makes the expectations of what she's creating very clear from the outset. So people entering into that environment are completely clear on what they're getting into, what their contribution needs to be. And it just forms a much more authentic approach, I think. And I suppose it's a bit of a response as well to a lot of the challenges that I see in my line of work, where people develop the technical skills. So they might be an accountant, a nurse, a teacher, whatever, an engineer, whatever their technical expertise might be. And they're really good at their job, so they get promoted. And suddenly they're being asked to manage people and get things done that they're asked to do from people above them in the hierarchy. And they really struggle. They find it incredibly difficult, because there's this misconception that if you're good at your trade or you're technically competent, then surely you can enact leadership effectively. And it's often not the case. Leadership is a really challenging area that takes many, many years to evolve and to practice. And so if we bring that back to Stoic philosophy, another great thing besides the social element to Stoic philosophy is that it's a practice. So it's the practice of Stoicism. There's no expectation that you need to be perfect from the beginning. We're actually learning constantly through our experiences and applying those learnings to the next experience, and reflecting on those experiences. So from a leadership perspective, it's incredibly powerful to be able to take these practices and continuously learn from them, and sort of relieve ourselves a little bit of that expectation that we have to be perfectly stepping in to these leadership expectations where we haven't actually had the practice.